The afternoon panel is devoted to the topic of energy sources, disruptive energy technologies, and policies. And it's a pleasure to introduce the moderator for the afternoon panel, the Honorable Stéphane Dion. Stéphane is a member of the Canadian Parliament since 1996. From 2006 to 2008, he was a leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. He was a Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs between 1996 and 2003, and Minister of the Environment from 2004 to 2005. So he can't hold on to a job, apparently. As Minister of the Environment, he secured one of the greenest budgets in the history of Canada, and in 2005 contributed to the rescue of the Kyoto Protocol while chairing the UN Conference on Climate Change in Montreal. Stéphane has also been a member of the YCEI External Advisory Board since we started in 2009. So please welcome Stéphane Dion.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's an honor to work with you for honoring Dr. Pachauri and for this conference on energy, future, and climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, the title of our panel is Disruptive Energy Technologies and Policies. I will ask two questions to our four panelists. The first one is, what is the most likely scenarios facing our energy future and climate future? And the second one is, if these scenarios are bad, as they are likely to be, what kind of policies would you suggest to implement as soon as possible to give us a better future for our energy and climate future? What I will do in order to set the stage is to... Yes, I will do it. It's to sum up the likely scenario if we do nothing more than what we are doing. That means the business as usual scenario, the current policy scenario. According to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, and Dr. Pachauri will say more about that later this afternoon, and according to the International Energy Agency. So very rapidly, what it gives to us, as you know, the scientists are telling us that we should do our best to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius beyond the pre-industrial level of warming. But according to the IPCC, the baseline scenarios without additional greenhouse gas mitigation result in global mean surface temperature increases in 2100 from 3.7 degrees Celsius to 4.8. So we're in trouble. We should be at 2, and we may go to well beyond 4 degrees. Countries are aware of it, so at Cancun, they committed to do more, and each country came with a pledge. But according to the IPCC, if all the countries are consistent with their pledge, reach their commitment, we are still facing a warming of 3 degrees Celsius instead of 2. And some of these countries, if not many of them, will miss their target for 2020. Unfortunately, it will be the case for Canada, my country. So the IPCC is saying what we need to do in order to keep 50% of chances to stay around 2 degrees Celsius of warming is to decrease our emissions, the world emissions, between 40 and 70% for 2050 and to continue down until the end of the century, 40 to 70%. The International Energy Agency is saying that in order to have a chance to do that, we need to start right now. They say that for 2035, we'll need to decrease our energy-related carbon dioxide emissions by 31.4%, when in fact it will increase, if we do nothing more than what we are doing, by 36%. So, short story, if we continue the path we are, our emissions will go up by a third between now and 2035, when it should go down by a third. And remember that the world economy will more than double between now and 2035. So we need to decrease our emissions by a third with an economy that will be twice the size of the economy we have today. That means that we need to be much more energy efficient than what we are. According to the International Energy Agency, global energy demand will grow by 45% between now and 2035. It should grow by only 14% in order to stay in the path of 2 degrees Celsius of warming, 14% for an economy doubled, which will twice the size of the one it has today. We'll need also to decrease our use of fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, that are accounting for 82% of global primary energy demand now, and are foreseen to stay at around 80% for 2035 with the current policy scenario, when we need to decrease it by at least to 66, two-thirds, for 2035 in order to keep a chance to avoid global warming well over 2 degrees Celsius. Very concretely, that means that for the use of barrels of oil per day, which is 87 million now, if we continue the path in which we are, it will go for 2035 by 111 millions of barrels per day, when instead we should decrease it to 78 million of barrels per day, which means 33 millions of barrels per day lower than the current policy scenario. The same for coal. Coal will increase by 44% with the current policy scenario for 2035, when we should find a way to decrease it to by 33%, by a third, instead of allowing it to grow by 44%. This with the scenario where capture and storage would be common practice. But it's not what we are doing. In fact, humanity is subsidizing fossil fuels 5 times more than renewable energy, according to the International Energy Agency now. In fact, we should not subsidize fossil fuels. We should put a price on carbon. According to the International Energy Agency, for 2035, we should have a price, the ton of CO2, of $125 for developed countries and around $100 for emerging economies, because everybody must do something more than what countries are doing now. We need to keep in mind that non-OECD emissions account for 45% of world emission now in 2000, 57% now, and more than 2/3 in 2035. Chinese emissions are exceeding US emissions by 60% now. It will more than double US emissions in 2035 with the current policy scenario. All these are not a crystal ball. It's only projections. But it's the trouble in which we are. It's not a rosy scenario. But fortunately, we have 4 great experts that will tell us how we may avoid it, what kind of ideas they have, what kind of ideas they have to help us to have a more rosy scenario with sound policies and way to boost the right technologies. So we'll hear first Holmes Hummel. Holmes was at Stanford University, where he did his PhD on this very topic, which is energy scenarios for climate stabilization. And from Stanford, he went to Berkeley. But in the meantime, he did a lot of things, especially recently. He was the senior policy advisor in the US Department of Energy Office of Policy and International Affairs. After we'll hear from Nebojsa Nakisenovic. He told me that I'm allowed to call you Naki. And Naki is Deputy Director General and Deputy CEO of the International Institute for Applied System Analysis and professor of energy economics at the Vienna University of Technology. If I have a title that long, maybe I would have succeeded to become Prime Minister of Canada. And your research interests include long-term patterns of technological change, economic development in response to climate change, and in particular, the evolution of energy, mobility, and information and communication technologies. After, we'll hear from Richard Lester. Richard is the Japan Steel Industry Professor and head of the Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering at MIT, and his latest book is Unlocking Energy Innovation, How America Can Build a Low-Cost, Low-Carbon Energy Systems. And finally, Vanessa Stewart is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Saltage, a full-service renewable energy company that develops, finances, and operates solar energy stations on client structures across the USA. So each of them will have between 5 and 10 minutes, no more, to introduce their thoughts about how we can get out of this mess. And after, I will allow each of them to ask questions to each other. They will have a very lively discussion between them. And we'll keep at least 20 minutes for questions. The questions will be the same system that this morning. You will have a card that you write your question, you're sending it to me, and I will ask the questions to any of the panelists. So let's start with, I will start with Holmes Hummel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. While the visual aids are coming up, I want to thank everyone at Yale for welcoming me back. I was here just about 6 weeks ago for a second appearance in a seminar series that's hosted by the Institute. It's been lovely to be here, but I want you to know how much of an honor it is to be a part of your program today. In fact, it's made more special by the fact that Naki is here on this panel and Professor Chong earlier. I have studied under each of them more than a decade ago. And though I didn't follow them into academia, I have done my best to take the insights of their expertise and apply them as the senior policy advisor at the Department of Energy over the last 4.5 years. And what I'd like to do in the next few minutes with some visual aids is to give you an insight of how the tools of their trade can be applied to some of the high-stakes decisions that are framed by the problems that the Department of Energy analysts do face. Thank you very much for inspiring me to follow that pursuit. I want to take issue with the opening premise of our gathering today by talking about some of the species of analytic products in our field. First of all, I was asked in the invitation to speak about things that would be likely to happen in the future, or forecasts for 2030. And like Professor Esty earlier this morning, I had a resistance to the question when posed. There we go. The fundamental element of a forecast is that you have some notion of the probability that the outcome will occur. We do have forecasts in this business. This is an example of a forecast that I looked at every 90 days. Very carefully we looked at this forecast, but I want you to see that the bounds on the forecast are statistically constructed by confidence intervals that are defined and derived from market activity. So it's actually groupthink, manufactured groupthink. We're looking at what everybody else thinks will happen in order to interpolate things that we think might happen. And as far as we can see in this kind of scenario, 2 years at the most. This is the kind of intelligence that we get under the product name forecast. Of course, we're responsible for making decisions that have impacts and implications far further in the future than 2 years, but we're really not able to assign probabilities successfully with high enough confidence intervals to use this kind of product. So we go to a different kind of product, an outlook. And an outlook answers a different kind of question. What if the prevailing conditions persist? These are the kinds of results that you get when you ask that type of analytic question, a kind of look like a straight ruler right into the future, up, up, and away. And every year, people complain about this work product. They say, this is definitely wrong. This definitely cannot be our future. Why are they such bad forecasters? So it's not a forecast. It is an outlook that tells you what will happen if prevailing conditions persist. And if you are an appointed official in the Department of Energy, it is your job to make sure that prevailing conditions do not persist. The question you are actually being asked on a daily basis is, how will the choices that you make change this trajectory? And in fact, we do an awful lot of policy analysis to ask ourselves, how big of an impact would we have if we adopted this policy or another policy? If we don't have this product, we actually don't have anything to fly by when we're thinking about the impacts of our actions. That's why outlooks are important. They are always wrong, but they are a good gauge of your level of ambition and your potential for contribution. Now, outlooks themselves fade away after a few decades. Really, it's preposterous even after a couple decades. 3 is stretching it already. So I want to introduce you to my view of the scenario, which is the craft that YASA has made famous world-round for decision analysts in the energy field. A scenario gives us a chance to ask creative questions about what will happen if the prevailing conditions do change. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have taken the actions that change those conditions. It could allow us the chance to explore inevitable surprises in the field and ask ourselves what risks we may face if we are not hedging our bets against one type of technology investment theme or another. This is a product from the International Energy Agency that shows you a current policy scenario at the top. This is world energy demand. And it shows you that if they were to assume that we could adopt some additional policies, we might do a little bit better in terms of demand. But if we were serious about that 2-degree target that we just heard about, that we would certainly need to take additional actions. These are the kinds of insights that one can derive from well-constructed scenarios. But even this scenario is very short-term, in my view. 2030 doesn't give us enough visibility about the implications of our actions or allow us to take in the full period of time for the diffusion of new technologies that might actually be responsive to the calls of our time. So I want to look squarely at climate. It's a theme for the Climate and Energy Institute here. It's not the only decision criteria that I needed to use as the senior policy advisor. The Department of Energy was constantly calling on me to use decision criteria related to national security or prosperity or jobs. But let's just take climate stabilization for a moment. Here I want to return to your consciousness the landmark contributions of those people who built the representative concentration pathways that have formed the basis of analysts for Working Group 3 and others in the most recent IPCC report. Here you can see that there's 4 centuries of future beyond the date which most scenario analysts stop calculating their results, 2100. But there is a multi-century scale of implication about the choices that we do make in this century related to the way we change the chemistry of the atmosphere. So I'm going to presume, for discussion's sake, that we are aiming for the representative concentration pathway that will get us the best chances of achieving a 2-degree stabilization scenario. Here is an exercise conducted by the International Energy Agency that presumes that that is the policy objective that you have determined you want to pursue, and then backcasted from it what you must achieve in order to stay on track. Here in the bottom line of these 3 is the course that they charted that was the closest to the representative concentration pathway that would give us the best chance of stabilizing below 2 degrees. And look, at 2100, they can calculate no further. But they have already come to a place where they have a profound insight from their analysis. In the year 2075, the energy sector's carbon footprint is eliminated. In fact, the International Energy Agency let it be known to all of the OECD decision makers, and the Department of Energy receives these briefings personally, that in order to have a good chance of staying on this path, we needed to contemplate an energy sector that was carbon-free by the end of the careers of most Yale students today. That means that every major infrastructure project that every current Yale student could invest themselves in for the rest of their careers needs to contemplate that if it includes carbon, it is a stranded asset and potentially a liability. The same is true for major nation states around the world. Now, to close, I wanted to give you a piece of my own research, which is a look at any scenario that would come out of any model that might try this kind of analysis, where we ask ourselves the question, what resource portfolios, this is from IEA still. What resource portfolios are consistent with the objective of eliminating carbon dioxide by 2075? I wanted to finish this part from IEA because they answered the question for us. They charted here, to the best of their ability, out to 2075, the composition of the energy resource portfolio that could achieve that target. And then they concluded, this appears possible, but it will be very challenging. And our analysis gives us results that are highly uncertain, meaning this cannot be construed as a likely outcome or a forecast. The trends in this scenario get us to a place where we are close, but a gap remains that may need to be closed through additional technologies, meaning we don't currently know a combination of technologies that will get us there. For me, that means that we need to look towards where we might find the types of technology sets, the systems of technologies that can move the needle. And here's where I want to introduce you to the work that I've contributed in our space, how we can interpret the policy implications of scenarios from all of these different modeling teams. I like to use the decomposition that was introduced first by Professor Kaya from Japan, but extend it more broadly, where those of you who are mathematicians will see quite simply that I have created an expanded identity that allows us to look at the driving factors. Here we are able to see that we could achieve a very aggressive stabilization scenario with no palpable change in human welfare. The population and GDP factor need not move dramatically for us to achieve our objectives. But we do need to make progress on energy efficiency, or the amount of energy that our economy requires. And we do need to continue to improve efficiency in the supply chain of our energy system from primary energy to end use. But look at what happens in this scenario that was produced by the United States' own National Laboratories premier modeling team. Here you see the carbon intensity of the energy supply becomes dramatically different as they try to achieve a stabilization scenario as aggressive as 2 degrees. What they're telling us here is that their model finds a least cost path that shows aggressive substitution on the supply side of the meter, not necessarily on the demand side. And then in this last graph, you see the fraction of carbon dioxide in the energy system that is emitted to the atmosphere. This, my friends, this is dramatic. So the leading national lab in the United States that's participating in the intermodal model comparison team is telling us that the least cost path they can calculate gives us a breathtaking display of aggressive replacement of thermal power plants in the United States with carbon capture and sequestration. At the same time, the IEA is telling these nation states that our research and development portfolios aren't keeping pace with that kind of technological optimism. And that if you're really planning to bank the planet on the kinds of graphs that I just showed you, you need to put your money where your mouth is at a national level. The Department of Energy has tried to do that with the Recovery Act, and the ARPA-E breakthrough technologies are our best contributions. I will close by showing you 4 graphs from a report that I'm proud to have called Revolution Now from the Department of Energy that shows you, my friend Levi Tilleman was responsible for this graph, how we can actually see that investments in technology convert into the kinds of deployment that would be relevant to the calls of our time. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to give you a tour through those analyses.